Hello, oh, wait.
There we go. Okay, now we're recording. Hey guys. So this is the first of something discussion video type thing that I'm doing. And today, I don't know, I'm trying to think of a topic to kind of talk about, and in my mind, my mind has always circulated the idea of talking about indie games. I mean, I'm an indie game developer in a way, or at least I am until I can find a job somewhere else. And I decided that, why not talk about this now, and kind of talk about how I feel about indie games, how I think indie games should be brought about, or kind of the different kind of ways that indie games can affect the world, and how I think people should treat indie games in a way. So let's talk about these little things called indie games. Of course, when I say an indie game, I am of course referring to an independent game made by an independent game developer. To define an indie game is a little difficult because there are a lot of really famous quote-unquote indie games that were only made by a single person. There were some that were made by a small team of people, being like 5 to 7 people. And then there were also some that were basically small companies of like 20 to 30 people. So the range of it is kind of weird to determine, but generally speaking, a lot of times an indie game developer is somebody who self-publishes a game or doesn't use like a bigger company to help fund their project or their game. They use either they fund it themselves through their own pocket money, or they use some other third-party resource to help get them money, whether that be a loan or more famously Kickstarter. Actually, a good example of that, of course, is the ever-famous game called Shovel Knight. Shovel Knight is a game everybody and their uncle has heard about. It's a game where you play as this knight whose weapon is a shovel. It's a platforming game, and it was famously funded on Kickstarter, which was just a little tiny thing that wasn't really meant for games back then, but over time, mostly because of Shovel Knight, honestly, more games have decided to try to fund themselves through Kickstarter. Indie games are really interesting in the way that you can have a game like Shovel Knight or The Wonderful 101, which are these massive titles. And on the other hand, you can have really hot garbage games like, gosh, I don't even know if I can get footage for this.
Every baby poops, but these little fellows poop everywhere.
The name was so weird because it didn't make any sense, but it was a game about like babies competing in kind of like a Splatoon-esque way to cover the most ground, but with their poop, even though they were already wearing diaper. Anyway, but what was interesting about not just that, but like a lot of games is that there are some games that are out there that just it boggles my mind how they can even be created. Like, how can somebody sit down, think of an idea for a game, and just be like, yes, that's what we're going to do, that's what we're going to make, and then they go through this entire process of creating this game, and like, you just have to imagine that there's some guy on the development team that's looking at this and being like, you guys know that this game is terrible? It's not good. Of course, I say this, and I immediately think of my process through indie game development. And I'm not going to say that I have published anything, because I haven't, or that I'm in the process of publishing anything. I'm in the process of creating something to publish. But I'm just thinking, like, what if we went ahead with the other games ideas that we had, like the Project Crap one or the Street Fighter one, and then we went ahead and made those into fully fledged games and released those? Like, we probably wouldn't have gotten exactly what we had dreamed of getting, and because of that, the quality of the game would have decreased dramatically. I think it honestly would have ended up like one of those hot garbage games that you see out there, and so it's really interesting. And if I were to surmise how these hot garbage games get created, it might honestly have to do with just the people behind it are just not good. But it's also equally as likely that the people behind it have no passion. Because you can be good at what you do, but not care about what you're doing, and then come out with some random mobile app game that's just trying to get money. And on the flip side, you can be really passionate about what you're doing, but not be very good at it, and then come out with some weird game like, this is hot garbage. But yeah, so there's a multitude of ways that those games can kind of come about. But also, on the flip side of that, there's also a lot of games that can be made that turn out to do really well. One of the more famous examples of these kind of games, of course, is Stardew Valley. Now, Stardew Valley, actually, hold on. As described in the book Blood, Sweat, and Pixels by Jason Schreier, Stardew Valley was a game that was made by a single person over the span of 7 years. Now, when you think about that for a moment, 7 years. 7 years developing the same game on your own. And remember, when you're developing a game on your own, that doesn't just mean that you're doing all of the code. You're also doing all of the artwork, all of the music, all of the UI design and menu design, and you're also doing all of the publishing. Meaning that you have to work with either have to self-publish it somehow, or you have to find some company to help fund your game so that you can get it published and have it be seen by a lot of people. And Stardew Valley is a very good example of this, where he made the art for this game and then he remade it, and then he remade it again. Because every time that he would make the art and develop a little more of it, about 6 months down the line, he would look at it and think it was just disgusting, that it was just terrible art, and he had to redo everything over again. All of the character portraits for every character had to be redone once again. And that's kind of depressing. And like, when the more you look into it, the more that you find these examples of people who got into indie game development and started developing their first game, their first major title, and they just get so depressed. They get so unmotivated to do anything. And especially for a guy like me who's wanting to get into that realm, it kind of scares me because, personally speaking, I haven't felt much of that. There have been mornings where I've gotten up and felt like not doing anything and not wanting to work on the game because I was tired, I was lazy, whatever you want to call it. But there weren't, like, I haven't been depressed. I haven't gotten to the point where I am sick of what I'm developing, that I don't want to work on the project anymore. And it kind of scares me that that might happen to me because I don't know what that feels like. One last thing that I kind of want to talk about before I end this video is the process and the scrutinization, so to speak, of buying these indie games. Now, if you are a regular video game connoisseur like myself, then you definitely heard about a lot of indie game titles. Sure, there are those big ones that everybody talks about, like Undertale, Stardew Valley, technically now Wonderful 101. More recently, of course, the Untitled Goose Game, which with the DICE Awards, which is like the Game Awards, but awarded by developers. Untitled Goose Game got Game of the Year at the DICE Awards. So that's something. And you hear about all these big titles, but what about other titles that people don't really think of? Or rather, titles that you're scrolling through the eShop, you find a thumbnail that you kind of like, you start looking at things, and you start to think, man, I haven't heard about this game. Should I get it? And the answer to that question is maybe. Depends on what you want to see, what you want to risk. It is entirely possible that this random game that you found could be just a game that you play every now and again or constantly. It could be a game that you love. But it is also equally as likely that you buy this game, you boot it up once, and then you're done with it. An example for me personally, there was this racing game called Grip that I saw a long time ago. And then one day it was on sale for like 75% off, like $10 or something. And I was like, you know what? Let's try it. Let's get this game. And I booted it up and it looked terrible. Overall, and more importantly, it was not a game that after I had shut it down, I did not want to boot it back up again. I didn't want to play it again because there were so many other things out there that I could play. And this game wasn't giving me anything that I hadn't already experienced, or if it was a new experience, it wasn't done well enough that I was willing to put my time into it. And as an indie game developer, that is something that you have to keep in mind. You are competing with everyone. Now, that doesn't mean the quality of your game needs to be at a level that it has to be on the same level as everyone else, AAA titles and whatnot. But it is very important that you advertise yourself correctly into the right audience. If you advertise yourself as this big game that has these amazing graphics and fast-paced gameplay, and it's one of the best out there and whatnot, then you're giving the preconception to your players that, hey, this game is just as good as those games, but mine is, so you should get my game. And then when they get your game and they realize that it's not actually as good as those other ones, then you're kind of stuck. So what I would say to that then is just make sure that when you advertise your game that you make it clear that this game is an indie game. It's not the best, but it's really fun for what it is. For instance, Untitled Goose Game. So many people got obsessed with that game last year, and for a very good reason. It's not a bad game, but at the same time, that game is not for everybody. For me personally, I have not finished the game because I felt that the puzzles were so open-ended that if you got stuck, then there wasn't really anything that you could do except just mess around with everything else until you somehow stumbled upon the answer, which for some people is fun and is good, but for me personally, I kind of like a more streamlined experience. And even with puzzle games, I still like to know that, okay, this is what I need to do and this is how I do it. I just need to figure out how to get to that point. Whereas with Untitled Goose Game, one of the goals that you have could be get on TV. What does that mean? I don't know. I see some TVs over here. Does that mean I need to get on top of the TV? Or do I need to get in front of a camera? I don't see a camera anywhere. What am I supposed to do? And it turns out the solution is so convoluted that you need to scare a boy into a telephone booth to make sure that the store owner that has those TVs runs out and helps him. Then while that she's out, you run into that store and you stand in front of the camera, therefore getting yourself on television. And this is not clear at all, because the TVs that are there are just showing random commercials. It doesn't show you that if you were to go in there, then the TVs would start recording you. It's just that you kind of have to just stumble upon it. And this isn't to say that Untitled Goose Game is a bad game. It is hilarious. The animation for the goose is amazing, but at the same time, there are things about it that can't make it live up to other games. And this is the point. That game never advertised itself as, hey, this game is just as good as these other games. All that it advertised was, hey, this is a game where you play as a goose and you mess with people. That was the entire premise of the trailers that they showed, and it worked. It worked. So many people were on board with that idea and they bought the game, they played the game, and they enjoyed the heck out of it. But like, that just goes to show that if you advertise yourself correctly into the right audience, that you are going to be massively successful. Now, granted, the Untitled Goose Game did get into what I like to call meme status, in the fact that there were a lot of people memeing about it, so a lot of people were talking about it, and therefore a lot of people bought the game because it was a meme. It was the thing to get into. Kind of like how Fortnite got so popular overnight. It's kind of a similar way where like there are better battle royales out there, but Fortnite is just being played by so many people that it's the thing to get. It's the thing to do. The point that I'm trying to make in this video is that it can be really hard to find a good indie game that you enjoy, and it's even harder to develop one that you can advertise to people and people will play. I see countless YouTube channels about people developing these games, and then they publish them and they get like 1,000 people, which is good. Like if your game's priced at $10, that's $10,000. The point is, it can be really hard to develop these games. And it can also be really hard to find these games. But at the same time, throughout all of this mess and nonsense, indie games are beautiful in a way. They're this thing that has only really come about recently because of the tools available to people. And anybody can now just pick up a decent enough computer, download the software, and make a game just on their own. They have all the tools available to them. They just have to do it. And because of that, we are in this new and interesting industry where anybody can make a game. That doesn't mean that they're all going to be good, but anybody can make one. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that the AAA developers that we've known for years are now, obsolete. And if anything, knowing that anybody can make a game, but these companies are putting together all these resources to make these massive titles, almost makes them more special. And at the same time, it also makes the games that independent game developers make even that much more special on their own. For instance, going back to Stardew Valley, Stardew Valley is a beautiful game. It is a game that so many people love to play. But that game was made by a single person. And I don't know about you, but that is really cool. Anyway, that's going to be the end of this video. Thank you guys for listening. Yep, I'm never good at these, so bye!